Hey everybody, welcome to the Effort Over Results podcast, the show for leaders, high performers, and recovering perfectionists who are finally ready to stop chasing gold stars and start showing up for what really matters. I'm your host, Quinn Magnuson, former pro athlete turned leadership coach, here to help you lead better, live bigger, and cultivate productive workplaces through an EOR mentality. Go book your free strategy call at effortoverresults.com. There is no obligation, but I can guarantee we will have a great conversation. Once again, go to effortoverresults.com, book your free call today. And today's episode is powered by podmatch.com, where podcasters and guests match to record amazing interviews. Kind of like a dating app, but less awkward. Now, back to the show. So what does it take to be truly unstoppable? To rise above childhood trauma, to shatter glass ceilings in the corporate world, to become a boardroom powerhouse, best-selling author, and one of LinkedIn's most influential personal brands. Today's guest has done just that and more. Victoria Pelletier is a force of nature. She's an award-winning executive, sought-after speaker, board director, entrepreneur, and DEI champion who has proven that resilience isn't just a buzzword, it's a way of life. Her latest TEDx talk on healthy resilience dives deep into what it really takes to thrive through adversity without burning out. And trust me, it's not just theory, because she's lived it. From overcoming an abusive childhood to leading Fortune 500 teams around the world, Victoria's story will challenge what you believe about leadership, identity, and what's truly possible when you refuse to be led by fear. This is the conversation you didn't know you needed, about personal power, purposeful impact, and why resilience with compassion is the real game changer. Victoria Pelletier, welcome to the EOR podcast. Let's go. Victoria Pelletier, welcome to the EOR podcast. Very happy to have you here today. When I do my research for podcast guests, I spend a lot of time looking at, maybe their TED Talks, their speaking engagements, check their website out, just really what their philosophy is and what they're bringing to the table in terms of messaging for my audience and audiences all around the world. I watched the TED Talk that you did. That was, I know you've probably done a few, but the one that I saw was, to say powerful is probably not even selling it the way I could. Impactful, powerful, just incredibly hard hitting. And I appreciate that. It was raw, it was vulnerable, and I think the people appreciated it there, and anybody who sees it on video afterwards, will appreciate it. So thank you for that, and thank you for being an incredible speaker. You've spoken openly about early experiences with trauma. How did that shape your leadership lens? Because you go from childhood trauma into working in the corporate world and leadership at some of the world's biggest businesses. How do you go from one of those to the other? Because it's an incredible journey, and we'd love to hear that today.
Awesome. Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. It's interesting. First of all, I didn't originally speak as openly around my story, my journey, for a few reasons. I was ashamed of it. I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. They're not sharing it, I thought, protected me to some extent. And so it's very much shaped me and my leadership, the lens, in that one, that trauma, which was, very quickly, I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who was extremely abusive to me, went in and out of the child welfare system. I'm fortunate to be adopted out of that environment, but to a very low socioeconomic family, so no money for vacations. I started working at 11, et cetera. And so all of that caused me to build these protective walls around myself. I was determined that my biology or circumstance would not prevent me from achieving whatever goal or objective I set for myself. So I started working at age 11. By 14, I was in my first leadership role. So that pushed me forward. It's my why, made me as driven as I am. And so I was able to show up, as that determined individual who understood the significance of performing well and then landed my first executive role at age 24. But the shift in leadership and how it's defined me. So it got me to that place, but I got a nickname as the Iron Maiden, in my mid to late 20s because I didn't tell my story. So I wasn't vulnerable. I wasn't being truly authentic. I didn't show the emotion that actually truly at a personal level and with friends would see. And so then I had to shift. My own mindset needed to change to start to recognize that sharing my story, sharing vulnerability, and opening up with others created this incredible connection with people. And that actually started to breed much stronger followership in the people I work with. So now I'm called the turtle, and that's because I still extremely resilient, but I let people see that softness inside. The journey got me to some extent, the trauma to where my career began and has continued, but then learning to do things differently. And because of it now, it's made me a very different kind of leader.
Hmm. What do you say to people who have experienced that trauma, who have gone through, for lack of a better term, gone through hell growing up, and there's one of two routes they can take. They can take the woe is me route and blame the world and live a life of basically saying I can't move forward, I can't go forward because this is just my lot in life. I'm meant to be kept down, I'm meant to be oppressed, I'm meant to carry this trauma the rest of my life. And then others who take it and use it as fuel to change their life, to help others once they help themselves. So my question, what do you say to that person who is in the woe is me state to get out of it and to really use it to propel and fuel them to better things?
I sign my social media posts generally with two hashtags. One of them is unstoppable. The other one's no excuses. I will tell you, the no excuses one drives my children insane. And so, for others who sit in a period of trauma or some other kind of challenge or adversity, I want to create space for them to give some opportunity to grieve, to feel the emotions. But then, and this is where the no excuses, you have a choice in terms of how you're going to respond to that. You can't always prevent or choose the circumstance that's going to happen to you, but again, you have a choice in terms of how you move forward. And so when I'm working with people, that's what I'll say, like take that and use it as fuel, as learnings, whether it's the drive that, it created in me, but that's where I need to sort of shake people out of it sometimes in terms of the victim mentality. Yes, it's horrible that it's happened to you if it's something traumatic, or it's unfortunate if it's some other kind of challenge or adversity. But it's on you. You are the CEO of your life, of your career. And so you will make the choices in terms of how you move forward. And so trying to shift their mindset into that, which is, again, hard in the moment, which is why it gives some opportunity to feel it, but then again, make a choice in terms of moving forward more positively.
Yeah. One of my favorite influencers and leaders, at least online, is Alex Hormozy. And I know that his response to when people say, well, I grew up like this, I had parents who treated me like that. And he goes, yeah, and that was kind of his response to everything. And he said the two words that are going to help you out of this is basically saying my fault. He's not saying you take blame for what happened. He's saying, but you need to at some point say it's now my responsibility to get out of it and to change the mindset of that trauma that I need to not necessarily leave behind, but you have two choices, like we've been talking about here over the last few minutes. And people say you need to develop resilience and toughness, and people equate those two words together. But in your TEDx talk, you talk about healthy resilience. So what does that mean? How can leaders, how can people develop healthy resilience without burning out or becoming emotionally disconnected?
Yeah, and I used the phrase intentionally, as I would say have described myself as an extremely resilient individual. And I think for many people, it's like, oh, just tough. Use your word, toughen up. Like you can deal, and you can handle a lot. But the Iron Maiden was the result of that for me. The way people perceived me, and the reality is, it wasn't actually who I am, but I was showing up in certain ways. So for me, it's developing healthy resilience, which is, yes, having that tough shell, being able to handle like life's ups and downs. And I mean, look at the world we live in, whether, macroeconomics, war, like all the stuff that's happening, right? So but there's the healthy piece that comes into it is, and I do believe, and there's data behind it. I share some of that in that talk, that there's people who are definitely more innately resilient than others,
Yeah.
but that it's like a muscle. that you can learn. So for me, I talk about there being like 5 steps around developing this healthy resilience. And so it's always anchoring on whatever that goal or objective or the vision is for yourself first and foremost, because that always brings you back. That can be the anchor for you. The next is then creating the space to be very like self-aware and self-reflective. So for me, when I heard that nickname initially, I actually didn't reflect. I was like, oh, well, that's kind of unfortunate. But I thought it's because I'm making some difficult decisions at work. But the more time I sat with that and a few other nuggets were dropped, I'm like, wait a second, like the, commonality here and things like like it's me. And so spending time with to reflect on why you have the emotions that you have, why are you reacting in the ways that you do. The next one is what I refer to as strategic intentionality. So that is starting to model the thinking, the language, the behaviors, and the actions that propel you forward. The fourth is having a strong community around you that's going to support you, whether that's professional help or even just people around you that can be radically candid, right? Who will tell you the stuff that the blind spots potentially that you have, or challenge you on whether you're taking the appropriate action. And the last is around permission to fail, and so not beating yourself down for that, and that when that happens, you just like pick yourself back up, and as long as you focus on what that goal is for yourself. Just remember, I sort of say 1 foot in front of the other's progress, and it's true, like baby steps. And so if you can focus, that helps pull us again out of that sort of victim mentality with that focus on future and the objective in terms of where we're trying to get to.
Yeah, and the philosophy that we espouse here of effort over results really speaks to that as well. It is about no matter your situation. I use health and wellness for an example. People who are, let's say, grossly overweight, they're out of shape, and they're like, well, I'm just meant to be this way. It's just the way it is. That is the victim mentality, number one. But two, they also expect some magic result. It's like, well, if it can happen in a short amount of time and with as little effort as possible, why bother? And so we talk about worry less about the result and what the end is going to look like, as opposed to just taking that, like you said, put 1 foot in front of the other. Start. Walk a little bit, do something, right? And for anybody who's trying to develop that resilience, and I believe Andrew Huberman calls it the anterior mid-cingulate cortex that gets developed. It's that challenge muscle in your brain that develops the resilience. It's about just taking on little challenges each day and being consistent with it. And I think coming out of that victim mentality probably is another great example of that effort over results, where it's like, we don't know what the end's going to look like. All we can do is start. And growth mindset, also not having a fixed mindset that you are who you are, because you can grow out of that. You can be who you want to be. So I want to go back to something you said earlier. You had mentioned, like, even in childhood, you mentioned like your first job at 11, first leadership role at 14. How do you go from the childhood trauma you speak about to at such a young age still working at 11 and then leadership at 14? Talk about that, because at some point in time there's a shift in you, and then going on to greater leadership roles in the future. But let's talk about that 11 and 14.
I think there's other factors. And so I will do a lot of mentoring and in the corporate environment, and people are trying to understand, how did you get even to an executive levels that I did at an early. There's other dynamics. One, I'm tall for a woman, and I hit this height by the time I was 11. And so I was I remember being 10 years old and towering over my teacher at school. And now I'm 5'8", but to be this tall at 11.
Sure.
And so, and being adopted, we didn't know like how tall I might be. So I looked older at a young age. I am an only child, and I was with adults all of the time. And the early childhood trauma, all of those things matured me faster than my peers. And so I'm sure child labor laws wouldn't allow 11-year-olds to work in the kind of setting that I very different time. But so there were some of those dynamics. Two, I very early realized I was a gifted student. And I skipped a couple of years. So I was, again, my classmates were 2 years older than me. Again, I was sort of put in that environment, but I very clearly saw that my work ethic, my ability to perform in the way I learned early on, like, how is success measured?
Yeah.
Certainly in a school context, but very much from a work perspective. And so I was driven. Like I couldn't, even just my work ethic came, like, my parents couldn't afford I didn't really go on vacations. I got new school clothes. Like, there was no food insecurity. There was always a roof over our heads, but there wasn't much else. And so if I wanted something and if I wanted to fit in a little bit more with my peers, I had to. So that's where a lot of the work ethic came from, maturity came from, but also my strong ability to perform and understand how success was measured in a particular environment and achieve against that, which is how I got promoted to ranks quickly. And that level of maturity, high level of performance is why at 14, the manager of the shoe store I worked at while I was in high school, promoted me to assistant manager and leading others.
That's awesome. That's a great story. What about education? How did education shape you, through high school, through university, and then when did the jump into the corporate world, into the leadership world really happen for you?
So my mom said to me, I think when I was, 11, she's like, "Tori, you need to do better than us." And I think she meant like vocationally. So
Right.
my dad was the school janitor. My mom was a secretary. Again, as I mentioned, I was fortunate that I did very well in school. And that was one area that it didn't require a lot of effort for me, which gave me the time to
Mhm.
work and do other things. But it was very clear that I was going to go down a post-secondary path. In fact, I wanted to be a lawyer. I think probably from the time I was 11. Although that could be my mom having me watch too much LA Law back like in the 80s. So that was the path, but you needed to get an undergraduate degree before you went to law school. And so it's funny, I like tutored the math and sciences to others when I was in school, yet I had no desire to go down that path. So I took a psychology. I thought this is going to help me in my legal career, whether I'm
Yeah.
working with criminals or in the corporate, because I was debating between criminal and corporate law. But I worked for a bank when I was in university. It was just in their contact center, flexible. And I was also an actor. So, I mean, a little bit of my no excuses. I was never a party girl. So even to this day, this is where I will not like, don't tell me you don't have time for fitness. Don't tell me you
Right.
don't have time to learn new skills, right? You make choices.
Yeah.
So mine was like, I wasn't out partying. I was working and doing some my fun things was acting, which I got paid for, but I really enjoyed it. But the banking environment gave me so much flexibility. But to my message around performance and understanding how to perform within less than 6 months working in that environment, I got promoted to a leadership role. Greater and greater opportunities. In addition to being in university, I took a ton of education that the bank offered me. I got my securities license, like a bunch of things. And so when I was ready to, after my undergrad that summer before the plans to go to law school, that bank had offered me a 1 month sort of secondment during the summer to work on early days of digital banking. In fact, they called it branchless banking. They didn't even call it digital. But it got me, so I moved across the country for that. And then they gave me an opportunity. So what I thought was, I loved the business world. And again, I was in a leadership role at that point. So I thought, let me park law school for 1 year. That's what I thought. 1 year. And then if I loved the city they'd relocated me to, I'll stay, switch universities, or I'll move back out west. And I did neither of those things, Quinn. I stayed in that city for many, many years. And I never went to law school because I loved the corporate world and the fact that I was like, subsequently, I've now moved many companies over since that time.
There is a beautiful message in what you just said, Victoria, because my son and daughter, like my son's still in university, daughter is now, working full time, but my son is panicking because he's going to be done university at the end of in December. And he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do next, Dad. I'm like, neither do I. Like really, it's about being directionally correct and moving towards things that interest you and are your passions. Like you said, you were supposed to go do law school and you ended up going a completely different direction, and it all worked out because you put the effort in, not expecting any particular result. It was just like, this really interests me. This is something I'm excited about. Maybe the city I'm in really excites me. And you just kind of took it in stride while still making effort. And so what I talk about is at effort over results is just keep moving forward. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Keep putting efforts towards where you want to go. It's kind of like saying, I'm headed to a city, but I don't know the address, right? Because the address could change at the last second and things can change in the last second. So this path you took leading you into the corporate world, now you're going into what I'm sure at the time and maybe even still is to a certain extent a male dominated industry, right? And I know that DEI is very close to your heart. We're going to talk about that in a second. But how did you shatter those ceilings in that male dominated industry? Did you feel any pushback? Did you feel like there was any resentment towards a woman coming in and being being a presence in that world, or was it just, no, this is just what I do? Like, what is the real cost of being a high achieving woman in corporate leadership?
Many. So my first executive role, I got recruited out of the banking environment to go be the chief operating officer and general manager for a large outsourcing company, a
Mm,
business process outsourcing BPO.
no.
And so at age 24, in a massive stretch role for me. So although I'd had experience in large scale contact center operations and the outsourcing environment was contact center, I hadn't run IT, HR, sales, marketing, like all the other functions. The only thing that didn't report to me was finance in that capacity. And I was the only woman at the executive table and the youngest by 2 decades.
Mm,
I will tell people I attribute significant part of my career success to going back to performance and effort, incredibly strong work ethic, strong performance. So again, but understanding how it's measured very differently in different companies. So getting clear on what that looks like. Subsequently, it's also a large part of it's around my personal brand. But the other thing is I'm not a fan of fake it till you make it,
mm,
except when it comes to confidence. And so even when I had none or very little, I've always put on my acting skills. Like I learned to show up confidently
yeah.
because people equate confidence with competence. And so I got that role because yes, I had a number of skills they were looking for. They also had banking clients. So there was ticks in the box, but I also showed up with confidence. So that's what got me there now. But I am used to, as I was in that first executive role, being the only woman in the room. I worked in technology as I have for the last many years now, and it's still very, very male dominated. So for me, what I've seen is, that I worked at IBM and I was leading a number of years ago, and I was leading large strategy session, walked into one of our largest boardrooms. It's myself, one other woman, and 40 men, 40. So again, I own the room. I am confident. I know my stuff. So I just like that. It doesn't bother me as a human walking into the room. It bothers me from the DEI perspective you said we'll talk about.
Yeah.
I've also seen this flip side in the questions I get as a woman, and I've gotten specifically as a parent that my male counterparts don't get asked. I think of I took almost no maternity leave when I had my second child, and well, I had a partner at home, and not long afterwards, a nanny, but like men aren't asked those questions, and I feel like the amount of guilt that I felt and pressure from others. So when my kids were 6 and 2. That year, I led North America for a large global organization, and we acquired 6 companies in 18 months. I spent 220 days traveling
Oh.
that year, which is how many business days there are. So tell you I took no vacation, and I was coming home on the weekends when I got to get home on the weekend. And like my youngest was speaking in full sentences and I'd missed a lot. My male counterparts wouldn't necessarily be questioned for some of those things. So it's just this weird dynamic to then just talking about sort of the human side and the emotions and the balance with that. Again, I viewed it as a weakness potentially because I was a young female in the workplace. And now it's a superpower for me. So it's been very interesting. Again, I have the confidence. I am used to it, but I push for more, better, and different in the rooms that I sit in.
I think it's a unique skill to, like you said, fake it till you make it, but it's having the confidence, or at least projecting you have the confidence, because you also need to be able to follow it up. So that confidence that you project gets you, let's say, gets you past the first gate, but then you still have to know, I know I have the skills and abilities to do this job. I just need the opportunity to, right? And a lot of times it's just that faking that confidence to get through the door to be able to show that. And I think that's a skill that's very underrated. Like I think people need to learn more about that. It's like public speaking. There's people who are public speakers who are very shy and introverted off the stage, because once they get on the stage, they prove that they have those skills and abilities. Incredible story about being in when you male dominated, like 40 males and yourself. That had to be. Was it intimidating? Like I don't want to be dismissive, but I mean, was that intimidating, or were you like, no, I'm just going to build a body of evidence that I am who I say I am, and they're just going to have to manage that?
I mean, that was an internal meeting, and so it was what it was. There was no changing it. It was a strategy session for a large team, and that was who was there. So
Yeah.
I owned it confidently. I mean, I'll tell when I'm talking to individuals, and they're like, "Well, how do you deal?" And maybe even on the public speaking, I'm like, I need to understand deeply. Like, I'm not going to talk for the sake of talking. I need to have a point of view that's founded in data, fact, experience. That gives me the confidence to sit in that room and speak up when there's lots of other voices trying to bring it down. What I will say is in a client context, that's where I try and influence. Actually, it was funny. It was still at IBM. We were having a joint top executive meeting with one of our clients, and we were assembling the team. And I looked at it for a moment. We had 13 attendees. And initially, I was the only woman. I'm like,
Mm.
no, we will not show up to our client like that. And so I needed to make different choices. There were people that were better subject matter experts in certain things I wanted to speak on, but I'm like, we're going to show up very differently because I don't want that to be our clients experience. And so, but that's where I think I'm in a position that, hierarchy and power has a privilege. Well, that was the privilege and the opportunity I had to create a different experience for my colleagues and in front of our clients.
Yeah. Which brings me to DEI. You're obviously a major voice in DEI. What's the biggest myth you think companies still believe about DEI initiatives? Because I know in some of the circles that I'm in, you bring those three letters up and the eyes start rolling, right? It's like, oh, here we go again. But I think it's because there's a misconception about what it is and how it's been projected in some situations that it's, for lack of a better term, it's too woke. But I believe in DEI myself, and I know that it can be very transformational for a company to have different voices around the table, different perspectives, not just gender wise, but culture wise and other. It's important to have different voices. What is the biggest myth that companies still believe about DEI, either positive or negative?
That there's an associated cost with being
Hmm.
focused on DEI,
Okay.
and they look at it in the lens of having chief diversity officers, carving out money for the employee or business resource groups, supporting whether it's the pride in the pride parade, a float, or those. So they see it as a cost associated with doing business rather than seeing business outcomes that are driven by having an inclusive environment where people feel a sense of belonging. So
Hmm.
that's one of the biggest myths I found, which sad. And so for me, then it's like, okay, well, let's come informed with data. Let's just let's not argue that there's some disparity, whether it's pay equity or just in diverse groups that are represented. So let's start with the data. And so that then it's a little bit, eye opening when you look at the, Fortune 500, then the numbers might have moved, but the Fortune 500 companies, the last time I looked at the numbers, and again, there might be changes, there were only 6 female CEOs, right? I
Hmm.
think two of color CEOs of color, period, right? Like, so the data is the data. Like, they're not so where instead I try and get to is like, let's focus. And now living in the US, I'm saddened to see the dial having and the pendulum swung back the other way. So instead, let's talk about it slightly differently. Instead of, let's create an environment where people feel included, where people feel a sense of belonging. If we do that well, you
Hmm.
then will naturally get a more diverse group to the table. And I now talk about it around diversity of thought and experience. I'm
Hmm.
not talking about color,
Right.
sexuality, religion, any of those things, that itself. But that said, we also need to be much more intentional about finding that. So when I get a slate of candidates that comes forward, I mean, if they all look and feel the same, then I need to ask our recruitment team to do something different.
Right. Can DEI and meritocracy live together?
Absolutely. It's so funny. I was just reading a very long report that came out of a guy, and I can't remember his name, in the UK yesterday morning, who was talking about that and said he doesn't think it's possible. But I mean, I look at it in the lens of, if I'm focused on an inclusive environment, creating that sense of belonging, then to do that, I need to be respectful of different, again, experiences, work and lived experiences. And so to create that environment, I'm not going to trade performance for that. But instead, if I have a list of like 10 requisite skills that I'm seeking, and skills or experience I'm seeking, I, as the leader, will be comfortable with hiring someone who only has 7 or 8 of those, but they come with that diversity of thought or experience that I believe can fill the gap. And then it's incumbent upon me as their leader to help bridge the gap on the educational pieces, on some of those skills or other experience as well. And so I think there's too many who look for the exact perfect fit as opposed to a blend of that. But in that, I'm not trading on the cultural fit and coming into the organization. I'm not trading on the fact that they've performed extremely well with those 7 or 8 out of 10 that I'm hiring them in with.
Yeah, and the other thing that pops in my mind when I think of DEI and the way people react to it is I think there's a lot of companies that do it as a virtue signal. And not that it's necessarily epidemic, but it feels to me like a lot of companies are going with, and I'm talking major corporations too, Victoria, like they go with what the social push is at the moment. And we saw that with Bud Light. We saw that with some of the larger corporations, that it's like, yeah, we support diversity. And it felt like virtue signaling, because as soon as they felt the winds of change shift, and I mean in government leadership, now it's okay to go the other way, right? And how do you feel about that when I make that statement that a lot of corporations, big brand names, and I won't name them, that everyone recognizes, are virtue signaling as opposed to truly being DEI supportive?
It saddens me. So then I need to, look back at whatever like their mission and their value statements are. So are you really committed to that?
Yeah.
So are you around doing the right thing? So instead, what I've seen is the vernacular has changed. They do use maybe some of the words, like they want to create a place where everyone feels like they belong. Okay, well, ways of talking about, but to achieve, there's no silver bullet for achieving it. Like it's a series of the way we work. It's the language, it's the actions, the behavior, the policies of within. And so hearing rollback, chief diversity officer a few years ago, like particularly like immediately, like in the pandemic, and then that first year or two post COVID, we saw, and George Floyd, and we saw that one of the top highly hired jobs now being eliminated. Well, so hiring that individual is not, that's also not your silver bullet, but hiring someone who knows how to work through ways of working, language, actions, behaviors, all the things that drive it, it is needed. But it saddens me to see the rollback on that. But then I'll challenge, like, around, so are you really committed then when you say you're around some of the value statements, and when you think about an employee brand or trying to attract people, like, how are these two aligned? The other thing I saw, though, was the performative actions prior to some of the more recent changes, where, when I think of, there was a client I was asked to potentially support from a strategy perspective around diversity. And they were doing something what I believed was very performative. It is, again, I'm not going to name the client, but they are known for not being inclusive to not only their employees, but to customers, a very faith-based organization. And so they hired a chief diversity officer and then wanted my organization to help work with them on that. And I said, look, it's performative. So I am personally not going to lead that engagement because I don't believe that, this is the right. So I've seen like both sides of it. And so I'm hopeful we land in a place of being committed to doing the right thing and trying to create the right kind of environments for our colleagues and the communities we work in, that in a work context creates, again, as that sense of belonging, but that itself drives long-term retention. It drives the productivity, like all the positive outcomes that actually come with having a diverse and inclusive environment.
Yeah, it almost seems like there's companies out there that would like come to organizations like yourself and go, "Hey, how do we look more inclusive?" It's almost like they need to just check a box. Like you said, it's performative, and it's really unfortunate because when you think about not just DEI, but so many different ways that companies can be more sustainably successful and productive and profitable, that are better for them, better for their people, better for the outcomes, better for the community. It's like, oh, we don't have time to do that, right? And so they, like I said, they kind of flow with what the winds of change are saying at the time. And it's really unfortunate because some of these largest corporations, I mean, they have the resources, they have the ability, and there are some really good ones out there, and I'm sure you've worked with some of them. But like you said, it's like, I'm not going to work with you directly because I don't really believe you're doing this for the right reasons. I think it's more performative than anything else, but will still help you try to get there, right? And that comes from leadership. It's the same thing when I try to preach the effort over results philosophy to leaders. It's like if you're going to be completely results driven and your people know that everything hinges on results, they're not going to be innovative, they're not going to be collaborative, they're going to feel, discouraged and rejected if they don't get the big win, even though they put tons of work into something. Getting companies to change their mind to effort over results is very difficult. Getting companies to change their mind on DEI, very difficult. And it's those ones, what I feel, Victoria, and what I've seen at least lately in the last 5 to 10 years is that now that the boomer generation is starting to retire up and out, and even some Gen X to that matter, once the millennials and Gen Zs start running companies, things are going to change dramatically. And what I keep preaching to my Gen X owners is you need to change now and get on this bus because this isn't a fad, this isn't a trend. The Gen Z problem that you think you have isn't a Gen Z problem, it's your problem. And companies and leadership really need to change their mindset to become sustainable. Because sustainable in the past, in the 1900s, I call it, in the 20th century, especially from the 60s through the 90s, was listen, I'm paying you, aren't I? This is all you deserve, really. Leave your baggage at the door. I'm not here to be empathetic or compassionate. It really is just you have a job, be happy you have a job. That doesn't fly anymore. And now leadership has to change. So my question to you is, what does leadership look like in 2025 and moving forward? Lot of different viewpoints out there, but for you, Victoria, what does it look like now in a good company? What does leadership look like, and what does modern leadership look like?
Yeah, I refer to it as whole human leadership. And that is, what you described in terms of it was certainly the environment I entered the workforce in, this like hierarchical command and control top down doesn't work. And so as leaders, it means we need to be empathetic. We need to learn to be more transparent in our communications. In my case, I'll borrow from Kim Scott, who she talks about radical candor. And so you can
Yeah,
be empathetic and be radically candid, but radically candid doesn't give you an excuse to be a jerk in those communications. So
right.
it's like the balance between those. It's recognizing that we can't park our lives at the proverbial door, even if we're working remotely, when we enter a workplace. So like recognize the whole human that sits in front of you. It's about building like authentic relationships with people. People don't quit companies, they quit their leaders. And so focusing on and recognizing that people do business with people they like and they trust. And so how do you build that kind of trust with your workforce? But again, being that kind of leader doesn't mean you trade, going back to the meritocracy, doesn't mean there's no trade-off for performance by being this sort of human-centered whole human leader that shows up themselves authentically, that can be vulnerable, but can also be transparent, and focused on like the well-being and the growth for their employees. You look at the newer generation in the workforce now, their definition of job security is very different than my parents' generation. Security for them is more around, are you investing in my skills, not only for today, but to keep
Mhm.
me relevant for tomorrow? And we can
Yep.
see that now even more so with the rise of AI, right? And so as leaders, we need to be having that kind of conversation around career development. It's not just the role you have today. There's a business and technology strategy that's moving us here. What skills do you need to get there and build the workforce? And they're in that case, to at an individual level, their skills for future.
How does a leader in a large corporation, and when I say let's just say 500, well, even 100, but 500 employees or more, how does the senior leadership team, because it's not just the CEO, the senior leadership team, how do they carry those values so that the entire company understands that's exactly what their mission, vision, and value statement are? Because I've worked with businesses where I had the leadership team around the table, and I said, folks, I looked at your website. I know your 7 value statements. I want you to write them down on a piece of paper right now for me. Not even the CEO could come up with more than 3. And I'm like, why do you have them then? And so when it comes to leadership, senior leadership teams, or any really manager and up in a company, in an organization, how do you get them to all truly believe in that servant leadership or whole human leadership, and make sure that they're all following that? Because it's got to be extremely difficult, especially as companies get larger.
Incentives drive behavior. So you need to, so first of all, as leaders, you need to be modeling the kind, of
Sure.
actions and
Top-down modeling, yeah.
behavior that you're asking from your team. But I think about, where I work now, Kyndryl, we spun out from IBM several years ago. And we had the opportunity to recreate when they spun out. And so there was a big focus on ways of working and talking about values. And so everyone's clearer like on our values and ways of working in our performance reviews. And when we ask the team, we're just in goal setting now. We say, not only are we asking you to put in goals related to the business results, the performance, we're asking you to do it around what we refer to as responsibility to others. Even if you're an individual contributor, how are you going to contribute to the way you're working with colleagues? As well. And then we also ask for development goals. And so I think in any organization, you need to, one, make sure, to your point, everyone understands the values and can espouse most, if not all of them.
Yeah.
Then they're operating from the front and demonstrating that. But we're also rewarding the right kind of behaviors and habits, and not just the performance. Like I refer to, and usually you see it in a sales organization, but the top performers who can be total jerks, like those toxic top performers, that's when leadership needs to step in and say, that's not tolerated. It's a painful one to manage that kind of thing out of the organization, because out goes their sales performance. But you're either committed to the value statement or you're not. And that's where, as a leader, you need to be bold in taking action.
Yeah. It's what I think that's what would create a truly unstoppable culture in a company is when leadership, like you said, like I said, and you said, top down modeling, leading by example, making sure, and that's where hiring people maybe even goes a little bit beyond, well, it goes beyond meritocracy, right? Where it has to, and where some of that, and you said it yourself, that thought and experience diversity comes into play, because you want to hire people that espouse the same values as you do and as the company does. And building a leadership team that is all on the same page, maybe if they're not even as skilled as the next candidate that could have had the position, but it models the values that you're trying to grow your company behind. I think that's extremely important. So what does a hashtag unstoppable, because I love the hashtag, what does an unstoppable culture look like inside an organization? Because you probably have touched on it, but what does it look like today in 2025?
Well, it's made up of individuals who live by that philosophy of being unstoppable. And for
Yeah.
me, that means that I am not going to let any challenge or adversity that comes my way prevent me from achieving the outcome, the goal, the objective, or vision that I've stated for myself or our organization. And with that also comes the no excuses. Right? Like
Yeah.
we can explain why we didn't hit, but ultimately we've got to be taking accountability for ourselves, for our teams, and for the organizational performance. But going back to behaviors, being an unstoppable organization, and it's different. And I wouldn't say every organization is. I mean, if you're a startup and you're scrappy and you're trying to raise capital, or you're in a scale up or in hyper growth mode, again, there's different behaviors and actions that are expected from the team, again, in terms of the ways of working. And so I often am working, I've led human capital businesses as well, and so talking around workforce strategy, and you need different things at different times. And so not all are going to be unstoppable, but you need a number of people who are very much unstoppable. And that's a mindset, that's a behavior piece. Going back even to the, my steps of resilience, anchor first on what's the goal or objective, and make sure that's cascaded down throughout the organization. So we are all working. We are clear on our purpose. We are clear on our mission, and we are clear on the outcomes that we are going to be delivering for shareholders, for clients, and for one another.
Beautiful. What is the number one thing that leadership teams and companies should be spending their time and resources on to truly be successful? We talk about sales, marketing, HR, operational efficiencies, strategic planning, all those things. Where are the time and resources? Where should they be largely being directed to?
Here's a good consultant answer. It depends.
There's a consultant question.
Yes. So, I mean, it really does depend on whether are you a product company, are you a services company, in which case I'll talk about R&D, in one, versus an investment in people who are delivering the services in others. I'll just tell you where I'm spending a significant amount of time right now is we're at this crazy inflection point, some of which around what we discussed around just a shift in employee expectations and the need for leadership to do different, but also from a technology perspective, and particularly AI. And so there's a conversation where I'm seeing a little bit of an analysis paralysis over where am I going to invest and spend my money right now? Because you've also got the external factors around, again, macroeconomics, sitting in the US, the tariffs, like what does that mean? So where there's a lot of time right now is, what does AI mean? How am I investing in it? Because AI has existed for a long time. There's been a significant amount of automation. But when you think about agentic AI and how that's evolving things, so there's very much, I'm seeing technology budgets being very much redirected into that space, but also the people. And so I have this great sort of visual that I use with clients around sort of a house. On the left-hand side of that, I say, like, let's do an assessment, and the house being your workforce and your talent. And the left-hand side of this kind of visual I use is around the analysis of what do you have today, and being, again, radically candid, being super like direct and honest with one another around what do we have in our workforce today. And then the far right-hand side, it's all of the business and technology strategy, where are we going, and all of those external pressures, everything from what are our customers demanding from us, to what are the expectations. We all want, again, post-COVID, we want the Amazon experience of stuff coming to our doors. We want the Netflix experience of even learning, et cetera. So understand left what you have, and on the right, where do we go and what do we need? And then the house is the build. And so, this starts with strategy, at the top of that. Foundationally, there's a balance of all the things that are then in the middle in terms of, are we buying talent, which is very hard when we think about even just AI skills. So no, you need to build the talent. Ideally, you keep the institutional knowledge and find those who have propensity to learn and upskill, reskill, borrow. This is when you can come to outsourcing organizations or contingent labor firms to help support the binding, the recognition of internal mobility, and how can you move people around within it. And so I have like the 7 Bs I talk about. So build, borrow, buy, bind, bounce. Some people need to get, out of the organization, and then the bots, the automation, and thinking about them. So back to that question. So investment is coming, and conversations around the AI itself, and what do we do and how do we bring it in, and the others, how do we, and what do we do from a talent perspective to address that?
Yeah, wow. I have a ton of questions off that, but I know we're pressed for time. But I want to say this. I think a lot of people see AI and human capital as opposing forces. You really, AI is going to replace humans, and there's a lot of people are going to lose their jobs because of it. But I think there's also a lot of proponents of how it's like, no, we're going to need human capital to work with AI. We just need to shift and adapt, and really make them work harmoniously together. And I'm seeing it happening. And even at the ripe old age of 54, I'm learning from it. I'm learning AI and ChatGPT and all this, and really what companies are doing with it. It's a bit scary for probably older generations. The young kids probably it's like, yeah, it's just normal. It's what our lives are going to be moving forward. But I don't think they're necessarily opposing forces unless you let them be. I want to wrap up here just in the interest of time for you. You're a leader, you're an influencer in the space that you work in. Who influences you? Who are your influences right now?
I have so many. So I'm still a voracious learner. Doesn't matter what level I've achieved. And so I'm consuming content all over. And so even when I'm at the gym in the morning, like I'm consuming content there.
Right.
So there's a bunch that I love, because I'm very focused on, leading in the right kind of environment, the likes of Adam Grant,
Yes.
I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek,
Yeah.
that's why. And I was going to look for his book, because there's another one here. The Infinite Game, right? You don't
Right.
win at business. You don't win at life. Like those kinds of Brene Brown around vulnerability, to Andrew Huberman. Although that podcast is way too long to get through in ever one sitting.
He had to start doing essentials because they were too long.
I know it's crazy like, those are some of my faves, but otherwise I've got like a bunch of different, like there's 2 guys that's my first million, and they did startups. And so they bring interesting people, usually like startup founders. And sometimes I totally disagree with like the opinions that people have, but I like opinion of thought and diversity from my own. So those are great ones. And then I heavily follow politics. So The Rest Is Us, both the UK version and the US version.
Okay.
Are that I love.
It's interesting when I mentioned Andrew Huberman and you mentioned his name. That's where I started. I've been in the corporate world for the last 20 years, but it was his podcast and learning about Carol Dweck's growth mindset that changed my life and really what allowed me to form the effort over results philosophy, because really it's about just putting the work in and not expecting necessarily the results to come out of it, having a growth mindset, but even just the routine. And I speak a lot to Kevin Lawrence's book on, your oxygen mask first, and how leaders need to take care of themselves. A true leader can't burn themselves out 24/7 and expect the people that they're leading to look at that and go like, this is a healthy way to lead. I think it's important for leaders to physically, spiritually, personally take care of themselves so that they can, from a business perspective, lead their charges. So all those names you mentioned, I connect with every single one of those. Mel Robbins lately for me has been influential, and Peter Attia as far as health and wellness goes. So I love that list that you have there. I want to finish with this final question here because we only got a few minutes. What do you want your legacy to be, Victoria? I mean, your story, your journey is so impactful. We know that, but not just professionally, but as a woman who has defied the odds, what do you want people to say when you're long gone? What do you want them to look back on and say, Victoria Pelletier was awesome at this, and this is what we remember her for the most?
Good question. And I can clearly articulate it because my definition of success has evolved significantly over the years.
Right.
In the younger years, it was about probably climbing higher up the corporate ladder and money and wealth that came with that. To now, I don't want to be known for any of that stuff. I want it to be that I had great impact and I touch lives in the workplaces, the community, and the world at large when I leave it. And that is everything around being the kind of leader that I want to work for, around creating those kind of inclusive workplaces and communities, and being able to share my story and coach and help others who come out of adversity. And also, I'll say as a mom that will forever touch me, that I raised two really good human beings.
Yeah, I love that last statement because that's what I want my legacy to be first and foremost. I want to have raised two beautiful kids that, contribute to the community and back into society, and that they continue to, carry that name on. Victoria, where can people find you? Let's get the socials out there. Let's promote what you're doing here. What do you want people to know most about you and where they can find you online?
Well, One Stop Easy Shop is my website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. And it's got all the links to connect with me out, whether it's LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook. My youngest jokes with me that I'm not really hip and cool because I'm not on Snapchat or TikTok. You can otherwise find me in all the other places.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's a nice short list. We'll make sure we have that in the show notes and up on the screen here. Victoria, thank you very much for joining us for this short time today. I hope you found the questions thoughtful and insightful and gave you an opportunity to tell the world about, really what it is, where you've been and what you're trying to do now. So thank you very much, Victoria, for being here on the EOR podcast today.
Thanks for having me.